Mike sat in his car outside the grocery store, staring at his phone. The number on the screen was unfamiliar, and he had almost ignored it. But something made him pick up. "Hello?" he answered. A man's voice came through the speaker, calm but tense. "Is this Mike Dawson?" Mike hesitated. "Yeah. Who's this?" The voice took a deep breath. "My name's Tom. You don't know me, but I've been sleeping with your wife." Mike felt his whole body go numb. His grip tightened on the phone. "What the hell are you talking about?" "I'm talking about Amber," the man continued. "Your wife. I've been seeing her for months." Mike's pulse pounded in his ears. This had to be a joke. A sick prank. Amber was at work right now, or at least she said she was. "You're lying," Mike spat. "I wish I was," Tom said bitterly. "But I found out something today, something that changes everything. She's been lying to both of us. I need to meet with you. In person." Mike wanted to hang up, but his hands were shaking too much. "You expect me to just believe some random guy?" "I have proof," Tom said. "Meet me at the Westbrook Motel in an hour. Room 214. Mike opened his mouth to tell the man to go to hell, but something in Tom's voice stopped him. It wasn't just guilt or arrogance, it was something else. Anger. "Why the hell would I meet you?" Mike asked. "Because Amber is not who you think she is," Tom said. "And if you want to know the truth, you'll come." The line went dead. Mike sat there for a long time, gripping the wheel. His first instinct was to drive straight home, confront Amber, demand an explanation. But something in his gut told him that she'd only lie. So instead, he turned the key in the ignition and drove to the Westbrook Motel. He had to know the truth. Mike pulled into the cracked parking lot of the Westbrook Motel, his heart hammering in his chest. The neon sign flickered, casting a sickly red glow over the damp pavement. The place reeked of cigarettes and cheap air freshener, exactly the kind of place where affairs happened. He killed the engine and sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. His mind raced with a million thoughts, but one question stuck out the most: what if this is real? With a deep breath, he stepped out of the car and headed toward room 214. His palms were sweaty as he raised his fist and knocked twice. The door cracked open. A man stood inside, young, maybe early 30s, with messy brown hair and tired eyes. He looked as wrecked as Mike felt. "You came," the man, Tom, said. His voice was raw, like he hadn't slept in days. He stepped aside. "Come in." Mike hesitated but finally stepped inside, his fists clenched at his sides. The room was exactly what he expected: stained wallpaper, an unmade bed, and a flickering TV playing some late-night infomercial. Tom closed the door behind him and faced Mike. "I know this is insane," Tom started, "but you need to hear me out." Mike crossed his arms. "Start talking." Tom let out a slow breath and reached into his pocket. He pulled out his phone, swiped a few times, then handed it to Mike. Mike took it reluctantly, glancing down at the screen. His stomach twisted. There, clear as day, were text messages between Tom and Amber. Some were flirty. Some were explicit. But the worst part? They went back over a year. Mike swallowed hard. His throat felt like sandpaper. "She told me you two were over," Tom muttered. "Said you were separated but still living together for financial reasons. She told me she loved me." Mike barely heard him. He scrolled further, seeing photos: Amber smiling, Amber in lingerie, Amber in places she had told Mike she had gone alone. He felt like he was going to throw up. "She played both of us," Tom continued, his voice laced with anger. "But it gets worse." Mike looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" Tom's jaw tensed. He reached into the bedside drawer and pulled out a small, black notebook. He tossed it onto the bed between them. "I found this in her bag," he said. "I don't know why, but something felt off. And when I opened it..." He ran a hand through his hair. "It's not just you and me, Mike. There are other names. Other men." Mike's blood ran cold. What the hell are you saying? I'm saying your wife isn't just cheating on you, Tom said, his voice dropping to a whisper. She's using us. Mike picked up the notebook with trembling hands and flipped it open. The pages were filled with dates, amounts of money, initials, and in some places, crossed-out names. One of them had a red line drawn through it. Mike looked at Tom. What does this mean? Tom exhaled. I don't know. But one of the names in there? He pointed at the page. I looked him up. He disappeared 6 months ago. A cold chill ran down Mike's spine. Amber wasn't just a liar. She was dangerous. Mike's hands trembled as he flipped through the pages of the black notebook. Names. Dates. Amounts of money. Some names had been crossed out. One had a red line through it. His mind raced. Amber had always been secretive about money. He never questioned it much. She handled their finances, paid the bills, and was always the one checking their accounts. But now, looking at this, he realized he had no idea what she had really been doing. He turned to Tom, his voice tight. You're telling me my wife is running some kind of scam? Tom shook his head. I don't know. But this isn't just infidelity. She's playing us, probably for money. Mike flipped back to the crossed-out names. One in particular stood out, A. Collins. Next to it, a date from 6 months ago. You said you looked this guy up, Mike muttered. What did you find? Tom pulled out his phone again and tapped a few times before turning the screen to Mike. It was an old news article from a local paper. The headline sent a cold chill down his spine. Missing businessman still not found, last seen 6 months ago. Mike read through the article. Aaron Collins, 42, a successful investor, had vanished without a trace. His family had reported him missing, but there were no leads. The police suspected foul play, but nothing had ever been proven. Mike felt his stomach churn. Are you saying Amber had something to do with this? I don't know, Tom admitted, rubbing a hand down his face. But look at the pattern. He tapped the notebook. Collins disappeared 6 months ago. Look at the next name. Mike did. D. Harrison. Crossed out. Look him up, Tom said. Mike hesitated, then typed the name into his phone. The search results made his blood run cold. David Harrison, 39, reported missing 3 months ago. No way, Mike whispered. There's more, Tom muttered. He flipped to a page near the back of the notebook. Look at this. It was a list of initials with dates next to them. Some had check marks. Others had question marks. But at the very bottom of the list, MD. Today's date. Mike's initials. His breath caught in his throat. His entire body tensed. She's marking people, Tom whispered. And you're next. Mike slammed the notebook shut. His hands were shaking so badly he had to take a deep breath to steady himself. This can't be real, he muttered. It's a coincidence. Tom's face hardened. You think so? When was the last time Amber asked you about life insurance? Mike's head snapped up. His stomach twisted into knots. Just last month, Amber had casually mentioned increasing his life insurance policy. She had framed it as, just in case anything ever happened. Something responsible couples do. He hadn't thought twice about it. Now, the realization hit him like a freight train. Amber wasn't just cheating on him. She wasn't just lying. She was planning something. And if he didn't figure it out soon, he might disappear next. Mike felt his throat tighten as he stared at his initials in Amber's notebook. MD, today's date. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't paranoia. Amber was planning something. He took a shaky breath and forced himself to think. What did she know? What did she expect him to do tonight? Does she know you found this? He asked Tom, his voice barely above a whisper. Tom shook his head. No. I found it in her bag this morning when she was in the shower. I took it and left. Mike exhaled. Then she's probably looking for it. Tom's expression darkened. Or worse, She already knows it's missing. The thought made Mike's stomach churn. If Amber realized what Tom had taken, she'd know he was onto her. And if she really was responsible for those disappearances, she wouldn't just sit back and wait. She's smart, Mike muttered. She covers her tracks. If she's planning something for me, she wouldn't make it obvious. Tom nodded. We need to figure out what her next move is before she makes it. Mike's mind raced. What had Amber done differently lately? What had she pushed him toward? Then he remembered, just last week, she had insisted they take a weekend trip together. Just the two of us. She had said with that warm smile. She had already booked the cabin. A remote, secluded cabin up north, miles away from civilization. Mike hadn't thought much of it at the time. He had even agreed. Now? It felt like a trap. His pulse quickened. He pulled out his phone and checked his messages. Sure enough, there was one from Amber from earlier today. Hey babe, don't forget, we leave for the cabin tomorrow. I'll take care of everything. Mike's hands tightened around his phone. He turned to Tom. She planned a trip for us. Just the two of us. Tomorrow. Tom's eyes widened. And she said she'd take care of everything? Mike nodded. I think she's setting me up. If I go there with her, I might not come back. The words felt foreign leaving his mouth. Amber. His wife. The woman he had loved for years. Was she really capable of murder? He looked back at the notebook. The names, the dates, the crossed-out marks. The evidence was right in front of him. We have to stop this, Mike said, his voice hardening. I'm not gonna be another name on this list. Tom hesitated. What are you gonna do? Mike clenched his jaw. I'm going to play along. Act like I don't know anything. And when we get to that cabin... His grip on the notebook tightened. I'll make sure she never does this again. Mike barely slept that night. His mind kept spinning, replaying every moment of his marriage, every sign he had missed. Had Amber always been like this? Or had she changed over time? By morning, he had made a decision. He was going to the cabin. But he wasn't going unprepared. Before heading home, he and Tom sat in his car outside a diner, going over a plan. You need proof, Tom said, tapping on the black notebook. This is suspicious, yeah, but it's not enough. If she really is planning something, you have to catch her in the act. Mike clenched his jaw. And what if she tries something before I can? Tom hesitated. Then you make sure you're the one who walks away. Mike exhaled. He didn't want to think about that. About what it might come down to. Tom handed him a small voice recorder. Hide this in your jacket. If she says anything incriminating, we'll have her. Mike took it, his fingers tightening around the device. This was real. He was about to step into the lion's den. A few hours later, he pulled into his driveway. Amber's car was already parked outside. His heart pounded as he stepped inside. The smell of fresh coffee and vanilla filled the air, Amber's usual trick for making their home feel cozy. She greeted him with a bright smile. Hey, babe! You're just in time. I packed everything for us. Mike forced himself to smile back. Great. She walked over and wrapped her arms around his neck, pressing her body against his. I can't wait for this trip, she murmured. Just you and me, away from everything. Mike swallowed the bile rising in his throat. Was this how she had done it with the others? Had she kissed them, held them, knowing they wouldn't be coming back? He played along, brushing his lips against her temple. Yeah. Me too. She pulled away, beaming. Then let's go. The drive. The highway stretched endlessly before them, cutting through miles of dense forest. Amber hummed softly to the radio, tapping her fingers on the wheel. She looked normal. But Mike knew better. Did you tell anyone we're going? He asked casually. Amber shot him a quick glance. Nope. Didn't see the point. Of course not. No witnesses. No one would know where he was. She reached over and squeezed his hand. I'm so glad we're doing this, Mike. Things have been stressful lately. I just want us to reconnect. Mike forced himself to squeeze back. Yeah. Me too. His other hand rested on his thigh, fingers brushing against his phone. Tom was waiting for a check-in. If Mike didn't text him every few hours, Tom would know something was wrong. Amber kept driving, her eyes fixed on the road. The closer they got to the cabin, the more isolated the world became. Mike had never felt more trapped. The farther they drove, the more uneasy Mike felt. The paved highway had turned into a narrow gravel road, twisting deeper into the wilderness. Towering trees pressed in on both sides, their bare branches clawing at the sky. Amber, on the other hand, seemed completely at ease. She hummed softly, fingers tapping on the steering wheel. Like nothing was wrong. Like she hadn't been planning his disappearance. Mike discreetly checked his phone. No signal. Of course. He clenched his jaw. She planned this. He had managed to send a quick text to Tom before they left, letting him know they were on the road. But now, if anything happened, no one would know. How much farther? He asked, keeping his voice steady. Amber smiled. Just a few more miles. It's really secluded, you're gonna love it. Mike swallowed hard. That's what I'm afraid of. The cabin. The road ended in a small clearing, revealing a rustic wooden cabin nestled between the trees. Smoke curled from the chimney, and a stack of firewood sat neatly beside the porch. Mike frowned. You said we'd be alone. Who started the fire? Amber let out a soft laugh. I had the rental company set it up for us. Cozy, right? She stepped out of the car, stretching like she didn't have a care in the world. Mike took a deep breath and followed, his eyes scanning the area. The lake behind the cabin was frozen over, a thin layer of ice stretching across its dark surface. Beyond it, nothing but forest. Isolated. Amber grabbed the bags from the trunk and turned to him, her blue eyes shining. Come on, let's get inside. I'll make us some drinks. Mike forced himself to smile. Sure. Inside the cabin. The cabin was warm, too warm. The fire crackled in the stone fireplace, casting flickering shadows along the wooden walls. A plush couch sat in the center of the room, a bottle of wine and 2 glasses already set on the coffee table. Mike's stomach twisted. She planned every detail. Amber handed him a glass of wine. To us, she said sweetly, clinking her glass against his. Mike hesitated. The notebook. The disappearances. His own initials marked in it. Did she expect him to just drink this? Amber sipped hers, watching him closely. Mike forced a grin and took a slow sip, just enough to wet his lips. He let the wine linger in his mouth before pretending to swallow. Amber's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes flickered. You seem tense, she murmured, setting her glass down. Why don't we relax by the fire for a bit? Mike's muscles coiled. She's waiting. Watching. Whatever she had planned, it was coming soon. And he needed to be ready. Mike sat by the fire, holding his untouched wine glass, his pulse thundering in his ears. Amber was watching him. He felt her gaze, analyzing his every move. She was waiting. For what? For him to pass out? For the drug, if there was one, to take effect? He shifted slightly on the couch, pretending to relax. This place is nice, he said casually. How did you find it? Amber smiled, leaning against the armrest. A friend recommended it. A friend? He forced a chuckle. Anyone I know? Her smile didn't falter. No one important. Mike's fingers curled around his glass. Lies. All lies. He had to act normal. If she thought he suspected something, she might change her plan, or speed it up. He set his glass down and stretched. I'm starving. Did you bring anything to eat? Amber's eyes flickered. Just for a second. But Mike caught it. Yeah, she said, standing. I'll heat something up. She walked toward the small kitchenette, her back turned to him. Mike's chance. Moving quickly, he grabbed his wine glass and poured the liquid into the fireplace, letting the flames consume it. Then, he set the empty glass back exactly where it had been. He sat back just as Amber returned with a plate of cheese and crackers. "Here," she said, settling beside him again. "You need to loosen up, babe. I feel like you've been tense all day." Mike forced a chuckle. "Just a long drive." Amber picked up her wine glass, swirling the red liquid. "You barely drank anything," she teased. Mike smiled. "Didn't realize." He reached for the bottle. "Maybe I'll just pour myself a little more." Amber's eyes darkened, just for a fraction of a second. Then, she smiled again. "Good idea." She watched as he pretended to pour. Mike knew now, without a doubt. She had drugged him. The only question was, what was she going to do once she thought he was unconscious? He had to find out. So when she stood up a few minutes later and said, "I'll be right back," disappearing into the bedroom, Mike slumped over, faking the effects of whatever she had put in his drink. And then he waited. Because now it was her move. Mike forced his breathing to slow, his body to go slack. He let his head tilt slightly, just enough to make it look like the drug was taking effect. From the bedroom, Amber's footsteps were soft but deliberate. She was waiting. Watching. Testing to see if he was really out. Mike kept his eyes half-lidded, barely breathing. He heard the quiet creak of a drawer opening. The click of something metallic. A knife? A syringe? His skin prickled as Amber's shadow stretched across the dimly lit cabin. Then, soft footsteps. Getting closer. He forced himself to stay still, his fingers curled loosely around the couch cushion. Closer. She knelt beside him. His pulse pounded in his ears, but he didn't move. Then, a hand on his wrist. Checking for a pulse. A soft breath. And then, in the quietest whisper, "I'm sorry, Mike." Something cold pressed against his skin. Now. In one swift motion, Mike's eyes snapped open. He lunged forward, grabbing Amber's wrist, twisting it. She gasped, stumbling back, but not before he saw what she was holding. A small syringe. His stomach clenched. She was really going to do it. Amber's face twisted in shock, then fury. "You!" Mike shoved her back. The syringe clattered to the floor. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Amber's chest rose and fell. The mask of innocence she had worn so well for years was gone now. "What the hell is this, Amber?" Mike growled. "What were you planning?" Her lips parted, then she smiled. Not a nervous smile. A knowing one. "You figured it out," she whispered. "Didn't you?" Mike's grip on her wrist tightened. "Tell me the truth." Amber tilted her head, her eyes gleaming. "Which truth?" Mike's stomach churned. "How many others were there?" She just laughed. Then, her knee shot up, slamming into his gut. Mike gasped, stumbling back. She was fast. Too fast. Amber lunged for the syringe. Mike reacted on instinct, kicking it away. It slid across the floor, disappearing under the couch. Amber's breath came fast. Then, her expression changed. The fear was gone. She smirked. "I was hoping you'd be smarter than the others," she murmured. "Looks like I was right." Mike's blood turned to ice. Others. The names in the notebook. The crossed-out ones. Amber had done this before. And now? She wasn't scared. She was excited. Mike's breath came fast as he backed away, keeping his eyes locked on Amber. She wasn't panicking. She wasn't scared. She was enjoying this. Amber slowly straightened, brushing her hair behind her ear. "You really think you're in control here, Mike?" she murmured. "You don't even know what you've walked into." Mike's pulse pounded. "I know enough." Amber tilted her head. "Do you?" She took a step closer. Mike instinctively moved back. Amber smirked. "If you really knew me, you'd know I don't take chances. I don't leave loose ends." Mike's gut twisted. Loose ends. That's all he was to her now. His eyes flicked to the front door. The windows. His phone was useless, no signal. He had no weapon. And she knew this place better than he did. Amber knew she had the advantage. She took another step forward, slow and deliberate. "You think you're the first man to catch on?" she whispered. Mike's breath hitched. Amber laughed. "You really don't get it, do you?" She gestured toward the notebook he had tucked into his jacket. "Those names? You think they just disappeared?" Mike's hands clenched into fists. Amber leaned in slightly. I watched the light leave their eyes. A chill ran down his spine. She was enjoying this. His mind raced. If he didn't act fast, he wasn't leaving this cabin. His eyes darted toward the kitchen. Knives. Amber noticed. Her smirk widened. "Go ahead," she whispered. "Run. Fight. It'll be fun." Mike's muscles coiled. He had one chance. Without another word, he lunged for the kitchen. Amber moved too. They both went for weapons. One of them wasn't leaving this place alive. Mike lunged for the kitchen, his heart slamming against his ribs. His only thought, get a weapon before she does. Amber moved fast. Too fast. Before he could reach the counter, she tackled him from behind, her nails digging into his shoulder as they crashed against the wooden floor. Mike grunted, twisting beneath her weight. She was stronger than she looked. Amber's breath was hot against his ear. "I was hoping you'd run," she whispered. "I love the chase." Mike elbowed her hard in the ribs. She gasped, her grip loosening just enough for him to roll free. He scrambled toward the counter, grabbing the first thing he could, a heavy cast iron pan. Amber was already on her feet. She lunged at him. Mike swung. The pan slammed into her arm with a sickening crack. Amber let out a sharp scream, stumbling backward, clutching her elbow. Mike didn't hesitate. He lunged again, this time knocking her against the kitchen table. The impact sent plates crashing to the floor. Amber panted, her eyes wild with fury. And something else. Excitement. "You're better than I thought," she breathed. Mike's stomach twisted. She was enjoying this. Amber darted for the counter. Mike lunged, trying to stop her. Too late. Her fingers wrapped around a kitchen knife. Mike's blood ran cold. Amber smiled. "Now we're even." She lunged. Mike barely dodged, the blade slicing the air inches from his throat. His pulse thundered. He needed a plan. Fast. The cabin was small. Nowhere to run. Nowhere to hide. Amber slashed again. Mike grabbed a chair, using it as a shield. "You never saw it, did you?" Amber taunted, circling him. "All those years, sleeping next to me. Loving me. And you never had a clue." Mike's grip tightened on the chair. "Why, Amber?" His voice was hoarse. "What the hell is this?" Amber twirled the knife between her fingers, grinning. "A game." His stomach clenched. She was playing with him. And if he didn't end this now, she was going to win. Amber lunged again, knife flashing in the firelight. Mike barely dodged, stumbling backward as the blade sliced through the fabric of his shirt. His breath came in short, sharp gasps. She wasn't just playing anymore, she was going in for the kill. The chair in his hands was useless now. He needed a real weapon. Amber grinned. "Getting tired, babe?" Mike's pulse pounded. His eyes darted around the room, searching for anything he could use. The fireplace. The iron poker. His chance. But Amber saw the flicker of recognition in his eyes. She moved fast, cutting off his path. "Ah!" she cooed, waving the knife. "You think I don't know what you're planning?" Mike clenched his jaw. Think. Amber tilted her head, studying him. "You know, I was hoping this wouldn't get messy." She sighed dramatically. "But I guess it always does in the end." She lunged again. Mike ducked low, barely avoiding the strike, and grabbed a handful of fireplace ash. With a swift motion, he threw it into her face. Amber screamed, stumbling back as the fine, Hot dust burned her eyes. Mike didn't hesitate. He dove past her, grabbing the iron poker from the fireplace. By the time Amber wiped the soot from her face, he was already swinging. The metal connected with her wrist. The knife clattered to the floor. Amber gasped, gripping her arm. Her expression changed. For the first time, she looked scared. Mike loomed over her, the poker gripped tight in his hands. His breath was ragged. His mind screamed at him to finish it. To stop her before she could ever do this again. Amber took a shaky step back. Her smirk was gone. "You don't have it in you," she whispered. Mike's knuckles turned white around the poker. Every instinct screamed to end it. To make sure she could never hurt anyone else. But then, a knock on the door. Mike's heart stopped. Amber's eyes widened. A voice called from outside. "Mike? Are you in there?" "Tom." Amber's head snapped toward the sound. Then, she bolted. Mike lunged to grab her, but she was already running, straight for the back door. He cursed and sprinted after her. He couldn't let her escape. Amber burst through the back door, disappearing into the dark forest beyond. Mike didn't hesitate. He tore after her, his breath ragged, his pulse hammering. The freezing night air burned his lungs, but he pushed forward. Ahead, Amber was just a shadow among the trees, her movements quick and desperate. She was running for her life. Mike's feet pounded against the frost-covered ground. Branches lashed at his arms as he closed the distance. Somewhere behind them, Tom was shouting. He must have heard the commotion, must have realized what was happening. But Mike couldn't wait. He needed to catch her. Amber glanced back, her wild blue eyes gleaming in the moonlight. And then, she veered left. Straight toward the frozen lake. Mike's stomach twisted. No. He picked up speed, his boots slipping on the frost, but he barely managed to stay upright. Amber's figure became clearer as she stumbled onto the thin ice. The lake stretched before them, its surface cracked and treacherous. Mike skidded to a stop at the edge. "Amber, don't!" She turned to face him, breathless, her hair wild around her face. And then, she smiled. That same damn smile. The one that said she was still in control. Mike clenched his fists. "It's over." Amber cocked her head. "Is it?" The ice beneath her groaned. "A warning." Amber didn't move. Mike took a cautious step forward. "You won't make it across." She exhaled, white mist curling from her lips. "I don't need to." Her eyes flicked past him. Mike turned, too late. A sharp crack echoed through the night. Something slammed into the back of his head. Pain exploded in his skull. The world tilted. And then everything went black. Mike's consciousness flickered in and out. Cold. That was the first thing he felt. A deep, biting cold that wrapped around him like a vice. His body was weightless, drifting. Then pain. A dull, throbbing ache in his skull. His limbs felt sluggish, unresponsive. Where was he? His mind clawed its way back to reality. The lake. The ice. Amber. His eyes snapped open. Darkness surrounded him. A murky blue haze. Air bubbles floated past. He was underwater. Panic surged through him. His arms flailed, his legs kicked. No surface. No air. He tried to scream, but only bubbles escaped his lips. Then he saw it, a hole in the ice above him. A jagged opening where he must have fallen through. His lungs burned. No time. Mike kicked upward, clawing through the freezing water. His muscles screamed. His fingers stretched. A hand appeared over the hole. Not to help him. To cover it. Amber. She knelt above, her face barely visible through the ice. Her cold blue eyes locked onto his. Then, she smiled. Mike's heart stopped. She was going to let him drown. His body slammed against the underside of the ice. He pounded at it, but Amber didn't move. She just watched. Waiting. Black spots danced in his vision. His body screamed for oxygen. This was it. This was how she had done it to the others. The notebook. The names. This was how they all died. And now, it was his turn. No. Not like this. With the last of his strength, Mike reached down. His fingers curled around something solid. The fireplace poker. Still strapped to his belt. With one final surge, he swung it upward. The ice shattered. Amber let out a startled scream as the frozen surface cracked beneath her. And then, the ice collapsed. She plunged into the freezing abyss. Mike broke through, gasping for air. His body lurched onto the ice, shaking, coughing. Amber thrashed in the water, her hands clawing at the broken surface. Panic filled her eyes. She was drowning. Mike dragged himself onto solid ground, every muscle trembling. He looked down at her, at the way her fingers grasped at the slippery edge. Her lips parted. A plea for help. Mike hesitated. Everything inside him screamed to let her go. To watch her sink. Like she had done to the others. Like she had almost done to him. But then, his hand moved. He reached forward. Amber's eyes widened in shock. For the first time, she looked afraid. And then, Mike let go. Amber's fingers slipped. She sank into the darkness. Gone. Mike lay on the frozen ground, his body convulsing from the cold. His wet clothes clung to him, ice forming at the edges. Every breath felt like knives stabbing his lungs. But he was alive. He rolled onto his side, forcing himself to look at the hole in the ice. Amber was gone. The lake had swallowed her whole. A ragged breath escaped his lips. His hands shook, his mind numb. He had done it. He had survived. But the horror wasn't over yet. Mike! A voice. Distant. Urgent. He blinked, trying to focus. Through the haze, he saw a flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Tom. Mike tried to call out, but his throat was raw. He barely managed to whisper. Here. Footsteps crunched over the frost. Then, Tom was there, dropping to his knees beside him. Jesus Christ! Tom breathed, eyes wide. What the hell happened? Mike tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. His body was shutting down. Tom didn't wait for an answer. He grabbed Mike's arms, hoisting him up. We need to get you inside, man. You'll freeze to death out here. Mike staggered, barely able to stand. His legs felt like stone, his vision blurry. But he let Tom guide him, half dragging him back toward the cabin. Inside the cabin, the warmth of the fire stung. Mike collapsed onto the couch, his soaked clothes dripping onto the wooden floor. Tom moved quickly, grabbing blankets, wrapping them around him. Talk to me, Tom said, kneeling beside him. Where's Amber? Mike's teeth chattered. He squeezed his eyes shut, the memory of her slipping beneath the ice flashing in his mind. She's gone, he rasped. Tom frowned. Gone? Mike swallowed hard. His voice was hoarse. The lake, she fell through. Tom didn't move at first. He just stared at Mike. Then, slowly, he exhaled. Jesus! Silence settled between them, broken only by the crackling fire. Mike clenched his fists, still feeling the ghost of Amber's cold grip as she slipped away. She was dead. It was over. Or at least, it should have been. But deep in his gut, something twisted. Something uneasy. Because Amber had been too good at this game. She had planned everything. And a woman like that wouldn't just let herself die. Mike's breathing shallowed. He forced himself to look at Tom. His voice came out hoarse. We need to be sure. Tom frowned. Sure of what? Mike's hands tightened in the blankets. That she's really dead. Tom stared at Mike, confusion flashing across his face. She fell through the ice. There's no way she... Mike shook his head. His body still trembled from the cold, but his mind was sharp. Amber had been too prepared. Too smart. If anyone could have faked their own death, it was her. We need to check, he said hoarsely. Tom hesitated, then sighed. You're serious? Mike nodded. Dead serious. Tom muttered a curse but stood. Fine. Let's go. Back to the lake. The night had grown even darker. The wind howled through the trees, sending shivers down Mike's spine. But it wasn't just the cold. It was the feeling that Amber wasn't really gone. The ice near the shore was cracked and uneven. A gaping hole marked the spot where she had gone under. The water beneath was pitch black. Silent. Tom shined his flashlight over the surface. Nothing. Mike stepped closer, peering down into the darkness. His breath clouded in front of him. The ice creaked under his weight. She should be floating. Tom muttered. If she drowned, her body would. He trailed off, his eyes narrowing. Something wasn't right. Mike's pulse quickened. No body. No movement. Nothing. She's not here, Tom whispered. A horrible realization settled in Mike's gut. She had escaped. The ice had cracked too easily. Had she planned it? Created a weak spot, a way to disappear just in case things didn't go her way? A way to fake her own death? Mike stepped back, his hands clenching into fists. She's still out there. Tom looked at him, disbelief in his eyes. Mike, man, listen to yourself. She went into freezing water. Even if she survived, where would she go? Mike turned, scanning the dark woods. His blood turned to ice. Footprints. Leading away from the lake. Tom followed his gaze. His flashlight beam caught the tracks in the snow. His voice dropped to a whisper. No freaking way. Mike swallowed hard. Amber hadn't drowned. She had walked away. And now? She could be anywhere. Watching. Waiting. And she wasn't finished yet. Mike's breath came in ragged gasps as he stared at the footprints leading away from the lake. Amber wasn't dead. She had escaped. Tom took a step back, running a hand through his hair. No. No, man. This doesn't make sense. She should be dead. No one survives that water. Mike's jaw tightened. Amber wasn't just no one. She had planned everything. The fake trip. The drugged wine. The knife. The chase. And now? Her own death. Mike forced himself to think. Where would she go? The cabin. Come on, he muttered, turning toward the trees. We need to check the car. Tom hesitated but followed. They rushed back through the woods, their boots crunching through the frost-covered ground. Every shadow seemed sharper, the trees pressing in around them. Mike's pulse hammered in his ears. He kept glancing over his shoulder, expecting to see her watching them. But the night remained still. Too still. They reached the cabin in minutes. The front door was still wide open from when they'd run out. Mike's stomach knotted. Amber could be inside. Tom raised his flashlight, sweeping it over the porch. Do we go in? Mike swallowed hard. We have to. They stepped inside, their breath fogging in the warmth. Everything looked the same. The blankets were still on the couch. The wine glasses untouched. The fire crackled softly in the fireplace. Too normal. Too untouched. Like she had never been here at all. Tom cursed under his breath. Maybe she. A sound. A faint, distant engine turning over. Mike's head snapped toward the window. His stomach dropped. The car. He ran for the door, bursting onto the porch just in time to see the tail lights of their vehicle glowing red in the night. The tires kicked up frost as the car peeled away from the cabin. Mike's blood turned to ice. Amber was gone. Tom ran up beside him, gasping. Oh, hell no. She took the car? Mike's hands clenched into fists. She was alive. And now? She was free. He could already imagine her behind the wheel, smirking, driving back toward civilization. Disappearing into the world again. And when she resurfaced? She'd have a new name. A new life. A new game. Tom exhaled shakily. What do we do now? Mike didn't answer at first. He just stood there, watching the red taillights vanish into the trees. Then, finally, he spoke. We find her. His voice was cold. Certain. Because he knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over.